Hello. We can consider the budget deficit from a variety of perspectives. The one I want to consider today is whether we describe the budget deficit as a structural budget deficit or as a cyclical budget deficit. In addition, I will consider the idea of discretionary budget deficits and automatic budget deficits, which will take us on to consider the role of automatic stabilisers. The budget deficit is the excess of government spending over government income, and predominantly government income, of course, is tax revenue. What we're doing on the board here is isolating the reasons for such a deficit. A structural budget deficit occurs because of the nature of the tax and benefit system, or the structure of taxes and government spending. A way to see whether a given budget deficit is structural or not is to examine the position of the government finances when the economy is growing at its trend rate. In such a case, any budget deficit which occurs should be because either the government has got too generous a benefit system or has got too small a tax base, and as a result tax revenue is not high enough. A second reason, and the principal reason why governments around the world in 2013 are experiencing very high budget deficits, is because of cyclical budget deficits. A cyclical budget deficit occurs because of the business cycle, because aggregate demand is low, and when aggregate demand is low, people are not paying as much tax revenue, income tax is low, sales taxes are low, and the government per force must be paying high levels of benefit. Do not suggest, automatically at least, that the government is doing this because it wants to reflate the economy. A popular mistake at A-level economics is to suggest that a budget deficit occurs in a recession because the government wishes to stimulate the economy. The government might wish to stimulate the economy, but there's a separate discussion. Automatically, the government will run a cyclical budget deficit because it must pay unemployment benefit to those workers who lose their jobs, and it fails to take in tax revenue when people spend less than they otherwise would do. The reason I have written A and B for discretionary and automatic is that this is in some way just a different approach to the same conundrum. The government has some choice about the things that it spends its money on. For example, a government might decide that it was appropriate to build a road in order to improve the supply side of the economy, in order, for example, to try and get its way out of recession. That is a choice that a government can make and might then borrow the money in order to do that. That would be an example of discretionary spending. Additionally, any changes to the tax and benefit system are examples of discretionary fiscal policy. Automatic fiscal policy, or an automatic budget deficit, occurs when fiscal policy or the budget deficit arises without any direct act by government. Governments must pay benefits. They are committed to do so. They can change the rate at which they pay them, but once they once a law is passed to pay benefits at a particular rate when people qualify for them, if more people qualify for those benefits, government spending on them will rise. Similarly, the tax take from an economy will, to a large extent, be dependent upon the degree of economic activity. For a given average tax rate, increased economic activity will result in increased tax revenue. And thus a big problem, in fact, for the UK's fiscal position in the last few years has been less that the government has had to spend a lot on benefits than that its tax take has been very low. Now, an automatic stabiliser is the tendency for automatic fiscal policy to ameliorate the conditions in an economy when an economy is experiencing either a boom or a recession. We know now, I think, that when an economy is in a recession, automatic fiscal policy will result in an automatic budget deficit. The effect of a budget deficit is to inject spending into the circular flow of income and via the multiplier process to create some added aggregate demand. This does not mean that automatically the economy will grow at trend, but at least according to Keynesian analysis, this is likely to ameliorate the extent of the recession and perhaps to reduce the size at which the economy contracts. Similarly, if the economy is booming, growing above trend, government tax revenues will be high, benefit payments will be low, and the government, if the structures of tax and benefits are sound, will run a budget surplus. A budget surplus is a withdrawal from the circular flow of income. This should slow down the economy's growth and hopefully prevent at least large overheating, stabilising the economy back towards trend. We should note, and we'll discuss in another video of course, that different economists view the effects of a budget deficit rather differently.